wondered at what point you talked to Alexander about the kind of music you wanted, because it's a very kind of third man kind of sound, but it's also very sort of 30s. It could be Nanachka or one of those Lubitsch films. Your first conversation about the music.
Yeah, well, we kind of said that I had this idea that maybe the movie was going to be like a Lubitsch movie or a Hollywood movie set in Central Europe or Eastern Europe, but shot in Burbank or Coke City. And we ended up actually, we shot in Germany. I don't really know how that happened, but that's just where we found ourselves. But I think it's still that kind of a story. And Third Man is something we talked about, we sort of feel our way through it. I mean, Alexandre, he lives about 2 blocks away from me in Paris, and he likes to have fun doing these scores, and so we have a chance to kind of play.
Because I just found myself thinking about the Third Man, and because one of Gustav's lines in the last black and white section could almost be something that Orson Welles would say, "Oh, these Death Squad uniforms are so drab." I mean, that's a very Graham Greene kind of line, and in some ways he feels like a Graham Greene character to me.
Yeah, well, that character is maybe I don't know how much we've talked about. Yeah, that he's really the story comes partly from these Stefan Zweig stories, but the character comes from a real person who's an old friend of mine, an old friend also of Hugo Guinness, who's my co-writer on this, and.
So I just felt too, in addition to those things, he's informed a little bit by just the aperçu, like saying the right thing at the wrong time.
Yeah, and he's also somebody who, the real person is somebody who maybe bases himself on literary characters a bit. I think he probably throws in a few Graham Greene lines from time to time, in his life. So.
But it's funny because that just reminds me there's so much kind of moving from your real life to these movie figures. I mean, people turn up in your movies. And I just wonder how you end up doing that, like finding this character and basing Gustav on him, but also just the way there's that back and forth between people you know and people you create.
Yeah, I guess, most of the characters in any of these movies that we've done over the years are I would say at least half of them are partly somebody we know. They're always mixed together, and they're always pulling a little something from a movie or a book too, and they're also they're part of the story. And sometimes the character comes out of what's going to happen to the character. It all kind of mixes together. But this one, I think, maybe more than any, this character is very particularly close to this one person who is a person who's not really like anybody else.
How often is it that you start with character versus story versus plot?
Plot, that's never been considered my strongest strong.
We talked about this. The last three films we've done had like a beginning and a middle and an end. They've had like almost classic 3-act structure.
Well, I've just heard that that's the way to do it.
Say 20 years into this, you learn how to make movies. Okay.
Yeah, eventually. I mean, the first one we did, Bottle Rocket, we sort of had to shoot the beginning after we edited it together and realized we didn't have one. We kind of, sort of started from scratch a little bit. This one also, one of the things that comes from Zweig is this idea of, most of his stories have that form of somebody meets someone who eventually will tell him his or her story, and that's what the big thing is. I mean, that's what the body of the thing is. So that's a kind of classical, sort of, more like, I won't even say 19th century storytelling mode, and so in a way that's and another thing. One of the movies we did with Royal Tenenbaums, we had a narrator, and I liked doing that. It's because there is my natural instincts to not have the story make any sense or follow or flow are challenged by a character who really is a storyteller, and it sort of forces it to be a story.
Well, at least makes it feel like it's a story, but in fact it's not.
It simulates the story. Yeah. So, and this one we have devices like that too.
But as you talk about this, and maybe we talked about this the last time I saw you, when I ran to your street like last summer, that's why device is very much the third man. I mean, it's very much that, and it's also a lot of Graham Greene fiction even is that kind of thing of somebody telling a history, and watching the films get ready for this, I'm just reminded of how often your films have somebody who has a history that precedes the movie. I mean, you like the idea of a history, so these characters don't just come in out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think it's nice if you have, maybe there's a sort of theater device, a theater, it's something familiar from the theater where in the course of events you are figuring out what's already happened. It's not necessarily laid out for you. That's kind of appeals to me, I think. I don't know if that really is what you're at. The look on your face says to me, that's not my question.
No, I'm wherever you want to go with this here, believe me.
But I've always been drawn to filmmakers who, like John Huston. Almost every movie is an adaptation, and he wrote the adaptations. He made. I mean, sometimes with collaborators, but and the Truffaut movies, other than the Antoine Doinel ones, and Soft Skin, but most of them are. I mean, I think maybe all the rest of them are adapted books, and he has a kind of almost. I mean, he loves books, and his movies are filled with books. He shows them, and people buy them in the movies, and they quote from them. I share that interest in books, I guess. Just liking to have them. I mean, I buy way more books than I read, I mean, I'm not a fast reader. I'm a slow reader, but I like to have them around.
Well, speaking of Truffaut, because you've done a lot that he's done a lot, they're often their kids in the movies. I mean, with the exception of Bottlerock, that basically every movie we made has had a kid in it. And that seems to be kind of another sort of touchstone with Truffaut.
Yeah, I like, essentially, Rushmore, this is, I don't know how many years ago, 18 years ago or 16 years ago, this movie, we had a bunch of kids in it, but Jason Schwartzman is the main guy, and after all these years, we still, I met him as a high school student, and we still, work together, and we've collaborated writing and in all kinds of ways over the years. Sometimes, kids, you work with them and you may never really see them again or hear from them again, but some people I've kind of kept in touch with, and there's something kind of great about that. I also had a great time with Tony Revolori. He's not a child, but he's 17 during this movie. He'd never been out of America, and he'd never done a movie before, and he was a great collaborator, and really just absolutely couldn't have asked for a better person to have with you on a movie set.
He was saying, you told me that he was so confident and relaxed in front of the camera, and you didn't realize he was an amateur until he almost got killed by a moving camera.
Well, yeah, he didn't know some of the safety rules and things like that. It hadn't been explained to him. You can't just stop right in front of a dolly, because dolly grips are big guys. They push the thing very fast, and they'll just bowl right over you. And he almost got badly hurt. But he quickly picked up the right habits.
But it's just the idea of finding people who will they belong in front of them. And a lot of these amateurs were people, first-time actors, are people who we see them and they seem immediately comfortable in front of the camera. You clearly have like an eye for sussing out that kind of person, don't you?
Well, I think usually you can tell pretty quickly whether, like with kids, you sort of can usually just see whether they can or can't do it, whether they like pretending and being a character, whether they seem natural. So it's not. I don't think it's a particular. It's not a hard thing to see the difference. Really, the thing is will you take the time to look at 1,000 of them? That's what the thing. Have you set aside enough time in advance of when you're supposed to be doing this to really look? And if you want to find somebody, very young, and often you might want somebody who's never been in something before, it takes some digging.
I guess I was just wondering about that too, because with Tony, it seems like you say, he seems like such a natural, that he's been doing this forever. He's just so confident, and given that a lot of his role is listening to Rafe just go off in these blizzards, I think people underestimate how difficult that is to do.
Well, also the thing is, with this movie, I spent a lot of my energy went into working with Rafe and paying attention to Rafe and being kind of there for him. Tony and I, we did preparation before the movie, but when it's a scene where one guy has 8 paragraphs of text to do and the other one is listening to him, you sometimes sort of forget about the one who's listening. In the editing room, we see he's always tuned in and he's always playing the scene and he was always with it. And that's not something that I'm in any way responsible for, because I didn't even notice at the time. I just sort of picked up on it later and was happy to see it.
Well, something you picked up on earlier is this is your latest collaboration with Bob and his first Oscar nomination for cinematography. What was your first conversation with him like? Everything with Fantastic Mr. Fox. So your first talk with Bob. What's your first conversation with Bob
about this?
You've done all your live action films with him.
Yes. Let's see. Well, I mean, I have actually. I mean, I'm going to make something up, but I would bet that we probably talked about. It's probably to do some lenses or something like that, or film stuff.
You go ahead and
we did have an odd thing in the movie, which is these different shapes, shooting in the multiple formats, different aspect ratios. We probably thought, is somebody going to stop us? Is somebody going to tell us not to do this? We got a little bit of...
Was there resistance to it?
A couple of people whose jobs are to make sure you don't do something catastrophically wrong, that you can't deliver a movie, weren't sure. But we figured, it wasn't, it used to be quite complicated to work, and, even Bottle Rocket, this is the first movie that is a long, long time ago. Well, we had, at one point, Polly Platt, who was one of the producers, we had this thought we'd like to do the movie in the Academy ratio, basically square thing, which is what part of this one is. Well, in those days, what we found that meant was we could either show in museums only, which wouldn't matter because the movie it ended up making $500,000. You would probably make that in museums, I think. We were hoping for more. So what it would have meant was going to all the multiplexes and basically sending somebody to each movie theater and having them change the gate and check it and change the projection of the theater and buy things, and it was just not going to be possible. Now everything becomes a DCP, it's a digital projection, and people are used to seeing these black things filling in part of the frame anyway. I mean, you barely even register it.
That's the other thing too, because Bottle Rocket was at the time most movies on TV, even on cable, were still panned and scanned, and that doesn't exist anymore.
No, right. It would have been fine for TV to have shot it that way too. But yeah, But anyway, that's something Bob and I talked about, and then also, I think we probably talked about the look of the different time periods. We were kind of, we're using kind of different color schemes, all that kind of junk and everything.
That kind of junk? This tall stuff is just junk?
Well, I mean, you know, it's the same conversations you have on every movie, just the exact choices are gonna be different, but it's, but anyway, I don't know, I don't wanna bore us by just pointing out what we've already seen.
The idea of making it in Europe, something that kind of set things off for you too.
Yeah, well, you know, the other thing was I always had this thought that I would like to do a kind of Euro story. You know, I've been kind of living over there for many years, you know, off and on, and I thought that was just something I was interested in doing. So this sort of became that. You know, our system that we've sort of figured out is we try to. I don't like to work at studios. I don't like to work on sound stages. I mean, it's not. I just don't have a lot of fun doing that. So I would like to find locations and then we adapt them. And sometimes we're building, you know, more than half of what you're seeing, but we're working with something existing. And also the process of looking for locations is usually kind of like research for me. We're just discovering things. Sometimes we're finding people, you know, like the doorman in this hotel in this movie, for instance. Well, we were in Budapest. We were looking at, we thought maybe we'd shoot the movie Budapest, and we went to this mental hospital that was outside of Budapest. And we thought, we'll see if this might be a hotel place that could be a hotel. We ended up not finding a hotel anywhere, but in the mental hospital, it was, you know, an abandoned, you know, it was closed, but there were two caretakers who were living there. And, you know, it was a vast place, and these two guys were there, and one of them spoke English. I mean, very unexpectedly, because, you know, in Budapest, it's not like most people speak English, they don't. He started talking to us, and he was very interesting, and he had taught English in Cairo, but he was Hungarian, and he and his brother-in-law, what's the guy who's the circus master called? A ringmaster. He was a ringmaster. He was a you know, a ringmaster of a circus. They had both fallen on hard times and were living in the abandoned mental hospital. We really liked them, and they came to stay with us in Germany, and they were in the movie. And then, unfortunately, one of them got fired. They say he changed after the movie, and he was no longer suited to being a caretaker of the mental hospital. So, you know, that's it. That's all I know. That's West End. I just heard that the other day. I'm sure he'll land on his feet again. I don't know. I don't know.
You were making movies for a while, and this acknowledgement must have been a pretty heady thing for you.
Well, it's great news. What do people say normally? I don't think it's happened to that many people that there's a normal reaction to it. Yeah. No, I don't know. I love it.
Because I mean, it just, again, we've talked about this before, these movies have become, I think, actually denser and denser as you've made them. And I just wonder if you find that in telling these stories now, it's sort of easier for you to tell a story and you have an interest in it the way you did at the very beginning, when you were still in love with the craft of filmmaking, and when you've seen the difference in that.
Well, I do feel like I've as much as I wanted to make I always tried my hardest, but I have figured something. One person likes an early movie that it's all totally subjective, and you know, it's who you talk to, like which movie they might like or not like any of them. For me, the experience of it, the thing I feel like I've learned a bit is how to be efficient and have the energy you're putting into it not be wasted, and have a good process, a careful process of how you go about making the movie. That's. I feel like I have specific things that we've kind of figured out a system for our group that we've improved a bit, and we've been able to make sometimes bigger movies for less money than we used to and that sort of thing. So that's, you know, that's maybe been a upward trajectory in one sense at least.